Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Okay, moving on. How many people ever heard these words? Repeat after me. Okay, this is good advice if you have very little financial education, but it's terrible advice if you're financially educated. So let me explain how I came up, where I heard this is that I was watching this very popular morning program that goes all the way across the U.S., and they have the very good-looking couple, you know, the host and hostess, and they're saying, okay, it's the start of the year, and this time we're going to have the financial expert of planet Earth come in and give us financial advice for the new year. So, welcome, so-and-so, financial advisor, and everybody goes on ahead and all this, you know. So this guy pops out, and this is 1999, and he goes, okay, ladies and gentlemen, my financial advice for the new year is work hard. Save money, get out of debt, invest for long-term, diversify. And the young host and hostess go, oh, that's such brilliant advice, big hand, big hand, big hand, big hand. So the next year they invite him back again, and again Freddie Financial comes popping back up there and says, what's your advice for the new year? And he says, I advise people to work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for long-term, diversify. And again the magical couple on the TV show, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Where does he come up with that great financial information? I just don't know where he comes up for it. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Then after the year 2000, the market started to crash. Remember that? It started to go down. And so they invite Freddie Financial back on again. They say, and welcome for the new year. He's going to give us the advice of how to handle this tough financial situation. And so Freddie Financial comes out, and one more time he says, my advice for this year is work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for long-term, diversify. And did this stop the market crash? No, the market kept going. And between the year 2000 and 2003, the people that followed this advice, millions of them, many people with 401ks, lost an estimated $7 to $9 trillion worth of their savings. They got wiped out. That same period, Wall Street paid the highest bonuses ever to their people. To me, that's unconscionable. But the reason it's unconscionable here is most people think that this is investment advice, and what you'll find is primarily a sales pitch. It is not good investment advice. Now, I'm not saying don't follow it. I'm saying if you want to be rich, this is bad financial advice. And what I'll be going into is why I say it's bad financial advice. Number one, when you look at work hard, the reason work hard makes no sense is because most people work hard over here. The reason you don't want to work hard here is because the more you work for money, the tax laws are written against anybody who works for money. If you're a laborer, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or an employee, the harder you work, the more money you make, the higher your tax bracket is. So these people get wiped out. The tax breaks are over here for people who have people work for them or their money work for them. That's the big difference. Save money is the next biggest one here. The reason save money is really, really bad advice is very simply because the world changed in the world time 1971. In 1971, there was a man named President Nixon who took office. And what happened in 1971 was Nixon turned our money into currency. So after 1971, we're no longer saving money. After 1971, we started saving a currency. And the problem with a currency is just printed by the government. It's called fiat currency. And what happened in 1971 was Nixon took us off what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which started in 1944 and ended in 1971. Up until 1971, the US dollar was actually pegged to a thing called gold. I forget the exact dollar amount, but that's one of the biggest problems. So after 1971, our school systems forgot to tell people that we're no longer saving money, we're saving a currency. And if you've studied economics, this is what a currency is designed to do. It's very simple. Over 40 years, a currency is designed to fall. Let's say you have $1, a currency is designed to drop in value to about 5 cents. So you never get ahead financially because the dollar is dropping. So after 1971, you shouldn't be saving money anymore because you're saving a currency. Now some people can say, well, how do you know this is true? Is the reason I know this is, I'm not saying this is 100% accurate because there's other factors to it, is my father's house purchased in 1967 or something was $50,000. And today that house is now worth $1.5 million. It's the same house. In fact, it's in worse shape now. But the house did not appreciate in value. What happened is the dollar depreciated in value. So the problem with the currency is it's always losing value. Now, the other way of looking at it is this, is how much has the dollar lost in the last 10 years, is this. You look at between 1995 and 2005, the way you can tell what your dollar is worth is very simply, it just kept coming down, the dollar. And what you can peg it to, or look at the next thing, is between 1995, gold was approximately $250 an ounce, and gold today is $500 an ounce. That means your dollar's purchasing power has gone down by 50%. So you've lost that much money by saving money. Now the reason all of this can happen is very simply because the government can print money faster than you can save it. That's why Kenny was saying there's so much more money out there right now looking for places to put their money, yet people still save money, even though it's going down tremendously in value. The other way of looking at this is, the question is, when the president or the Federal Reserve Chairman gets on board, he talks about this word here. How many people have heard them say there's no inflation? Okay, how many people realize that things are going up in price? Okay, so the question is, how is it that our leaders can say there's no inflation? And the reason they can say that is very simply because the Federal Reserve Bank is only charged with tracking CPI, what's known as Consumer Price Index. The only thing they're concerned about is the price of consumer goods, i.e. this is consumer goods, this is consumer goods, my watch are consumer goods. Consumer good prices are coming down very simply because China is coming up. But what they don't tell you is this, is that the reason they can say that there's no inflation is because of consumer prices, but if you study basic accounting or economics, they are not charged with tracking asset value. So what's happening is asset prices are going up and consumer prices are going down. So the reason this is so important is if you look at it between 1995, oil, how much was oil in 1995? Anybody know? It was approximately $10. Today, 2005, it's about $60 a barrel. And they can say to you there's no inflation. And the reason they can say there's no inflation is because we have no financial education in our schools. We have basically a population that is financially not too smart, even though they have a good education. So they're telling you there's no inflation, but asset prices are going up. How many people right now are worried that maybe your children's children may not be able to afford a home because they keep going up in price? They just keep going up, but they have to get smaller and all this stuff. Because asset prices are going up, but consumer prices are going down, and that's why they can say there's no inflation. And that's why saving money doesn't make any sense. For one big reason, the government can print money faster than you can save it. On top of that, during this period of time when inflation was running, say inflation was running at 50%, the banks were paying you 1% interest on your money. And yet those financial advisors will tell you you should save money because of the magic of compounding. Well, let me tell you, this is compounding a lot faster than this thing here. So I'm not saying that this is the truth. You know, watch the price of oil, watch the price of gold. If you see gold drop into $100 an ounce, maybe you should save money. Or the government's not printing any more money. But this is stupid. To save money when these trends are going on, it makes no sense. That makes sense, you guys here? So that's why I don't save money. I've been saving gold since 1996. The other part about this right here is that between 1995 and 2005, these guys lost $7 to $9 trillion. The Economist, the magazine I subscribe to, The Economist said during the same period when those people were losing $7 to $9 trillion was the biggest financial bubble in the history of the world. That's why Kenny has made money, Scott has made money, I've made money. The reason we made fortunes is we were not in the stock market, we were not in savings, we were not in bonds. We were not doing what our financial planner said to do. We were doing exactly the opposite. And the reason it works differently here is because the people that were making money, if you look at it this way, the chart, the stock market from 1995 to 2005, the stock market went like this, spiked, and it went down. Same period of time, gold, oil, and real estate went like this. So the people that were in real estate, gold, and oil, basically commodities, made a fortune. The reason that happens is every 20 years the market changes. So this market here in gold and real estate should go up to about 2020 and head back down again, and then stocks will come back up again. That's basically the running trends. But they didn't tell the investors who were in mutual funds that. That's why so many people took a hammering at that time. Now the other part about it is the people that won were the debtors, not the savers. How many people in this room wish you had bought more real estate in 1995? How many people wish you were in debt up to your eyeballs with real estate? You know what I mean? That's the difference there. If you had bought real estate back in 1995, which is when I was buying as much as I could, that's when it took off. Also, in 1996, I started my gold mine in China, and I've always invested in oil because I used to be an employee of Standard Oil for a few months. But that's why I understand these markets. I'm a commodities guy, not a stock and paper guy like that. So those are some of the big differences. So the thing about get out of debt, this is really bad advice. To save money and get out of debt when the market trends are going like this is really stupid. You should be getting into debt for something like this and getting out of debt for something like this. But one of the biggest lessons my rich dad taught me was the difference between there is good debt versus what? Hello, good debt versus what? Bad debt. Very simple as this. Good debt makes you rich, bad debt makes you poor. And as I said earlier, the reason that most people in the middle class and the poor are struggling is what they spend their money on, is they're spending money on things that are in bad debt, things that are consumer items, not asset items. And that's the big difference. So I'd like to bring up, this is a very important subject because debt goes both ways. I'm going to bring up another attorney friend of mine. He's one of Rich Dad Advisors, is Garrett Sutton. Garrett is he's written 2 books. One is Own Your Own Corporation.
Right.
Well, what I want you to have me talk about is the ABCs of getting out of debt. Okay.
Americans love scores. All right. What's the Yankees score? What's the Lakers score? We love scores, but there's one score that you don't pay attention to enough, and that's your FICO score. All right. That is your personal scoreboard for borrowing money and using the credit system. And this book talks about how to maximize the system. Now on the chart there, a 450 score is low and an 850 score is high. What do you need for a 450 score? There are 2 things. Does anybody know what you need? A social security number and a pulse. All right? That will give you a 450 score. But if you have a 450 score, what kind of borrowing power do you have? 0. And you will find yourself paying more money for utilities, for auto loans, for all sorts of things you need to get by in our society today. So you need to know how to win this game. You need to know how to get your FICO score up to 700, up to 800, and then you can take advantage of our credit system.
Could I say one more thing? This
Sure.
is the most important. The reason I wanted Garrett to talk about this is one of the problems with having bad debt is you don't get good debt.
Well, and that's the point, is I want you to get out of bad debt so you can start using good debt. If you have a low FICO score, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the good debt opportunities. You need to get out of bad debt so you can get into the good debt program here that Robert's talking about and start improving your financial future by investing in real estate, oil, and commodities.
Right. And the biggest problem with people with bad debt is that they think that by borrowing money in this real estate market is the way to get out of it, and they just make the matters worse. I've met so many people who are trying to get into the real estate market or any kind of market or gold when they have bad debt. I said the first thing you should wipe out is that bad debt, because if you're a moron with bad debt, you'll probably be a moron with good debt too, you know, so you want to get out of both of it. And I've been in debt, you know, I mean, I've sold people. American Express has had me on their most wanted list at times, you know, when I lost a company back in the 70s. But it was one of the best things I ever did, was really work my way out. It was almost $1 million. Was almost working my way out of this was one of the best things I ever did, because it made me appreciate this, but it also made me a lot smarter. So.
Well, and Robert, you and Kim provide the example of how you got out of debt, the bad debt, in this book. It's a great example. It can be done by anyone. There are simple steps you can take to get out of bad debt. Don't let people tell you, though, that it can be done in 30 days. It takes a while to get out of bad debt.
$1 million took a while. It took a while.
So the point is that you're going to use these strategies to get out of bad debt so you can take advantage of the good debt opportunities that are out there. Kenny, Scott, they both mentioned there is money out there. There are people willing to invest in good projects. Take advantage of that. Get out of bad debt, start using good debt.
Thank you. Big hand for Garrett, please. Thank you. So I said the average person who's a passive investor, you know, they believe in saving money and getting out of debt. The next one is invest for the long term. And the reason I think that's really silly is very simply because as a passive investor, you don't know what long term means. But as an active investor, I need to know the difference between commissions versus what? Fees. And the difference here is this, is when I buy a piece of real estate, I may pay a 6% commission. But if I start investing in a mutual fund or one of those funds, I pay fees forever. So let's say I start when I'm 25 and I go till I'm 65. Every quarter, every year, I'm paying a fee to the mutual fund company. With real estate, I pay it once, and that's all I have to pay. So I don't mind a person making money, but what I object to, I mean, anybody, if they're taking fees and I'm not making any money, I think that's highly unethical. You know, at least with my real estate commissions, I have some control over that. Does that make sense, you guys here? So one of the biggest things about mutual funds, and that's what this book says here, Unconventional Success, is the reason mutual funds don't work is very simply because they're just taking too many fees out. And the worst thing about it is that the mutual fund companies do not have to provide you with a financial statement, so you never know how high their expenses are. So to me, it's only a mutual fund company can only operate because we have financially illiterate or financially unsophisticated investors. I personally don't want to just give somebody my money for 40 years and they take a fee off of it every year. That makes no sense to me. That makes sense to you guys here? So then the last thing here is diversify, diversify, diversify. How many people have heard diversify? Good. Diversify, there's another word for it, it's called de-worsify, you know? And rather than take my word for it, because I don't diversify, I selectively look hard until I find one great investment. And when I find that great investment, I strike on it. But I will not just buy a whole bunch of junk. But don't take my word for it again. Listen to what Warren Buffett says about the word diversify or diversify. He says, diversification is protection against ignorance. It makes little sense for those that know what they are doing. And he's the world's greatest investor. So that's Kenny came up here, he's looking at 30 deals a day or a week, whatever he's looking at. I'm constantly looking at deals. You don't buy every single one of them. But the thing about, the reason they say is protection against ignorance, in my opinion, is the ignorance of the person selling you the investment. And why I say that is most people selling mutual funds are on this side of the equation here. They couldn't tell you a good investment from a bad investment. So it's actually protection from them. If you diversify and the market crashes, they can say, well, I protected him. but they're also protecting who? Themselves. And that's why that I don't really support diversification. What I support instead, if you're an active investor, is this word here, is I focus. I'm looking for that deal, constantly looking for it. And what focus stands for is follow one course until successful. And what I mean by that is there's several things. Is I look and look and look until I find what I want. But also when I was learning how to be a real estate investor, I stayed with it, stayed with it, stayed with it, stayed with it until I was pretty good at it. And then I moved on to some other kind of investment. I don't diversify. The problem with diversification is this, is if the market crashes and you get wiped out in your 401k, your retirement plan, your financial planner will not give you a money back guarantee. So let's say it crashes when you're 55 years old. By diversifying or following this advice, you're not any smarter than when you started. You have no experience, so you cannot recover. Does that make sense to you guys here? So I'd rather learn to invest and focus and buy what I want to buy, even though I make some mistakes early on in my life, and that way I don't have to make the mistakes again. So that's a very big difference. So let me just say this much. If you have low financial education, follow this advice. Work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term, diversify. This is great advice for passive investors who just turn their money over to somebody they hope is smarter than they are. But if you want to be an active investor, then you focus, you follow one course until successful. So just say it one more time, as I did real estate for a long time, and then over here on the fast track of the cash flow game, I started doing IPOs, I started funding companies. I just kept practicing, but I stayed with it until I was successful. And that's the difference. The reason I stay back with real estate, I enjoy it, and bankers give me a lot of money for it, so it's nice and easy, and it's really easy to find a deal. I'd like to give credit for the person that gave me this. My rich dad always said focus. But follow one course until successful came from a group called Winners Camp in Hawaii, where they take young people and they train them to focus, not diversify. So basically that's why this advice here I think is very bad financial advice if you're an active investor, but it's very good advice if you're going to be a passive investor. And that completes this part of the section, and when we come back we'll go into how to have more control over your investments. Thank you very much.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Okay, moving on. As I started this whole thing, is that there's 3 kinds of education: academic, professional, and financial. And because we don't have much financial education in our school system, is causing a lot of the problems in the world today. There's a big transfer, or the gap between the haves and have-nots. So the thing when I went to Sunday school, I was always taught that if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. Okay? Or that if you excuse me. See, I still can't spell. Taught. Excuse me. If you teach. You know, I flunked out of school because I couldn't spell, and I tried this on the teacher. I said, it's a very uncreative person that cannot spell a word 3 or 4 different ways, you know. They still gave me an F, you know. And if you teach a person to fish, you feed them for what? Life. And that's from Sunday school. But because our school system's not teaching anybody to fish, what happens is the capitalists of the world come out and they're selling people fish. Those are financial planners, stockbrokers, real estate brokers, insurance, you know, and everybody's got to make a living. But if you look at the word sell fish, it spells selfish, you know what I mean? And that's my whole complaint, is because exactly as Scott was saying, is that people will come up and they'll only sell you what they make a commission on. And most of them are not investors, they're just commission salespeople or commission employees. And that's why we have so many people who are believing in saving money, getting out of debt, investing for long term and diversifying, because they're really sales pitches. And the last thing I want to say is this, is that, you know, there's a lot of people who believe in giving people fish, and these are the socialists of life. There's nothing wrong with being a socialist. I can't spell that either. But my rich dad said it was the Robin Hood theory of finance. You know, take from the rich and give to the what? Poor. As my rich dad said, the problem with giving poor people money is it just manufactures more poor people. You know, from the president on down, they all expect somebody to give them money all the time. So he says the problem with being Robin Hood, take from the rich and give from the poor, is Robin Hood is still a crook. You know, and a lot of people think he's a nice guy and all this, but he was still a thief for people. So what the Rich Dad Company does is we don't sell investments, but we do our best to teach people to fish. And then you can do it any way you want. So that's what this whole Teach to Be Rich program is about and all this. So with that, one of the questions I'm always asked is, how do I get started? You know, how do I stop being a passive investor, and how do I become an active investor? And since I don't sell stocks or anything, I do sell education. That's why I created this cash flow board game. And I'll quickly go over it really quickly. I designed this cash flow board game. Here is the rat race. And people in the rat race, this is what you go to school to. You know, go to school to get a job, and one of them is rat race. People go inside here and they buy stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and they buy a big house. What the rich invest in is out here called the fast track. This was 1933. It was created by the fast track was actually created by a man named Joseph Kennedy, who was the father of President John Kennedy. And the fast track said you had to be a multi-millionaire to invest out here. So the best investments are found out here, and the worst investments are in here, stocks, bonds, savings, and all that. The key is to get out of the rat race onto the fast track is you had to understand a financial statement. And that's what the cash flow game teaches. So one of the keys of getting from the rat race to the fast track is, in many ways, this is the financial statement from the cash flow board game, and it is the only game in the world that teaches people the fundamentals of accounting: income, expense, assets, liability, and the statement of cash flow. And so that's what this game is designed to do, so that you would have the skill to be able to be an investor on the fast track. And we'll go into why this document here is so important at the end of the program here. But that's why we created this board game. It's not an easy game. I recommend, you know, you take about 4 hours to play it once. Then you play it about 4 different times. And then if you really want to get good, is you start teaching people, like, you know, 10 other people. The more you teach, the more you learn. And that's why the game was created. So it's basically, this is what my rich dad taught me years ago, so that you can teach yourself and teach others. And in my opinion, this is one of the ways we can minimize that huge transfer of wealth with so many poor people inside a great country that's going broke. So when people ask me, how do I get started, this is how I recommend you get started. And this is here we have 4 people who've played my cash flow game and all this, but this is what it looks like. It looks like a Monopoly game. And there's a ritual I recommend to maximize your learning. So before you get started going in to start investing your hard-earned money, I recommend you start playing with paper money or fake money first, because it's a lot safer with, you know, play money. So what I recommend before you start the game is what you start by saying is, let's say you don't know the people, you introduce yourself and you say such things as, you know, what my family taught me about, what I learned at home about money, stuff like this. Would you start that? What's your name?
My name is Anissa.
Anissa. We just start with that. That's a little ritual we have. See?
My name is Anissa, and what I learned about money at home is that money is very private, and it's not something that you want to discuss with anyone, even the professionals and other people that might help you grow it.
How many people have heard that at home? Good. Thank you. Very good. Next.
Hi, Robert. My name is Ron. And the thing I learned growing up is money does not grow on trees. Therefore, you should protect it.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Linda Taylor, and what I was taught was basically money doesn't grow on trees. Parents aren't made of money, so you can't afford certain things, so don't
How many
ask
people
for
were taught that you couldn't afford everything you wanted and stuff like that? Okay, thank you.
My name is John, and one of the things I learned from my grandparents who lived through the Depression was that you could count on pensions and you could count on Social Security.
How many people ever heard the same thing at your homes too? Good, thank you. That was my home because my parents went through the Depression. So let's say you play the game, it takes about 4 hours. I recommend you don't drink, because, or do other strange hallucinogenics and things like this, because this is not so much about fun. It is fun game, but it's really to enhance your learning and your financial IQ here. So once the game is over, take about 4 hours, then I ask you to complete the game by saying something such as, what I learned from this game is tonight, or when I played it, or how this applies to my life is. So the game has to affect some part of your life now. So it is this ritual, and every time you play it, you go through that same ritual, you'll find out something new your parents told you, but at the end of the game, you'll find that it actually does affect your life. If it doesn't affect your life, it's just entertainment. If it does affect your life, it's education. So, and these people have already played the game, so would you mind sharing how the game has affected your life?
Sure. One of the things that I learned is start with the small deals first before you go into the big deals, because it will help you get over your fear of investing at all.
That's a very good lesson, because something I'll go into is a lot of times we have, especially men, that they think investing is something of a ego trip or something. So on the game board you have small deals and you have big deals, and the men naturally go for the big deals. And what I say, the reason games are great teaching tools is very simply because games reflect your behavior. Like how many people have played a game and somebody was a poor sport, they threw temper tantrums and all that. That's a reflection of behavior. So with the guys, I always see it. They always go for the big deal. They may be flat broke, but they want to play Tarzan or Rambo of investing, and they go for that. Okay? Yes?
The thing I learned is when you play this a few times, it actually messes with your emotions when you start looking for deals. You see them in the real world, and it starts just pulling at you. I think it helps you deal with the emotions of doing deals.
That's right. It's a very big point, because as Warren Buffett says, if you cannot control your emotions, you cannot control your money. And so one of the main reasons people are not financially well off is they let their emotions either get to them. You're like, oh, I just got to have that dress, or I just got to have that new car. Or a lot of times for parents, the child will come up to you and say, oh, I got to have this. So the parents emotionally, give to their kids and all that. So as Buffett says, if you cannot control your emotions in this game, you cannot control it in the real world. So that's a very good life lesson there.
What I learned was the difference between earned income and a passive income, and working for income is not very much fun, but having your money work for you is.
Right. Earned income is you working for money, which is the highest taxed income. And passive income is your money working for you, which is the lowest taxed income. So just learning that makes the game tremendously valuable, because at that point, she starts to change the way she thinks, and she starts looking for passive income deals rather than working harder. As I said, one of the reasons of working harder is tough is because the more you work, the higher tax bracket you go into. If your money's working for you, you can pay zero taxes legally. And I do emphasize the word legally, because you don't want to go to jail, because it's easier to make money outside of jail than inside of jail. What's you learned from playing this game?
The biggest thing that I learned is that you have to invest for cash flow, because without that you'll never get out of the rat race, you'll never win the game.
That's a very good one. The difference between cash flow versus capital gains. Both are important. And if you're a very successful active investor, you'll invest for both of them. But most people are investing for one or the other. So that's how you start the game by saying what your family taught you, and you end the game with what you learned, and that's what makes the game valuable. A big hand for these people here. Thank you. In moving on, I'd like to bring up my partner here. She's also my co-author, and that's Sharon Lecter. Would you please big hand for Sharon, please? Now, I want to give credit where credit's due. Is when I turned Rich Dad, Poor Dad over to her, it was about 350 pages of swear words. And Sharon is the A student and I am the F student. Okay, so that's why we work as a great partnership here. But she took Rich Dad, Poor Dad and cut it down to under 200 pages and then made it an international bestseller. So I did write the book. Sharon did have to clean it up quite a bit, you know, because I am a former Marine. I don't speak with the kindness of language. But the reason I wanted Sharon to speak at this point here is because, as I said to some of you, I really did not like school. You know, I was a C, D, and F student, where Sharon was the A student. And during school, I always sat next to people like Sharon. And nothing's changed now that I'm an adult, you know what I mean? Because I always sat next to the A student so I could, you know, get past my tests. So, would you mind talking about why you're happy with this product here? You know, Teach to be Rich and
Absolutely.
Education important.
And Robert's right. You know, he was disenfranchised as a child, and I, guilty as charged. I was a straight A student. I was a neurotic straight A student. And I am now a recovering A student. So if any of you would like to join my club. But my passion came not from my experience at school, because I was one of the few that could excel in that environment. Don't know why. But I have 3 children with Michael, and all 3 of them struggled in that school system. So how many of you are parents? How many of you had parents? Thank you, like 100% participation. I saw my children lose their interest in learning. How many of you can agree with that? Okay. Our world has changed. We as parents have changed. Our school system has not changed. And I get very emotional about that because that is my passion. And we've built this company to give an alternative, not only to you, but to you as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, to help change the future of our children. Because if they stay in school, they will not get financial education unless you provide it to them. We have a lot of initiatives that are starting, and there are some wonderful teachers out there, teachers that are seeking this information, but not enough. And as parents, we didn't do what we needed to with our children, and I want to make sure the information is there for you as parents to provide a valid future for your kids. And this is really, as we talked earlier, is a new era for Rich Dad. Because it's not just about you making money. It's about you not only learning how to bring financial freedom to yourself, but also how you can bring that financial freedom to others. And we talk about team sport. As a straight A student, you did not want to make a mistake. How many of you can relate to that? The fear of failure. Even if I made it, I wouldn't admit it. How many of you are guilty of that? You know, I'll find an excuse and justify it any way I can because I want to be right. That was pounded into me. But I also learned in school that you had to go it alone. How many of you know that feeling? You have to do it by yourself. That's what we teach our children. However, I was the popular kid at test time. I had a lot of friends the few days before tests, and it's the group, it's that the advisors, being able to work together. And this information helps you, gives you the type of education that you've heard today from Robert, and you're going to continue hearing it, about why straight A students aren't all rich. I love the section that says, don't teach pigs to sing.
What she's talking about here is this: is I would not have written a book on education if it wasn't fun. And I wanted to make it really fun, but also you have to be very careful on who you taught. So that's why I said don't teach pigs to sing, because how many people have ever tried to teach something to somebody when they didn't want to learn it? You know, it's really frustrating. It's demoralizing. That's why I have that. But make it also fun, you know? Absolutely.
And I just want to tell a quick story because we have so much more to share with you. But the game that you just saw these people play, I had the honor of coming to the first beta test when it was drawn on a piece of paper, and actually Robert will show it to you a little later, with my daughter who was 19 at the time. And we had 3 tables of people playing, and there were some pretty upset people in that room. They were saying everything that was wrong with the game. One of them was my husband. And there were bankers in the room, you know, very frustrated, couldn't get out of the rat race. And I'm sitting next to my daughter at a different table, and she's asking me questions, and I think, gosh, this is really good stuff. And I will admit, as a straight A student, I was the only one that got out of the rat race. I'm kind of proud of that. But we had to leave early that day, because those of you who have teenage daughters, you know what it's like when you say, let's go play a financial board game. But we had another date, so we left, and I thought, this is fabulous. We walk out the door closes, and I'm waiting for my daughter to kind of give me a hard time, because I promised her 2 hours, and we were now 4 hours. She says, Mom, that game was awesome. That game, I learned more in the last 3 hours than I have in the last 3 years of high school. I had just met Robert and Kim that day. But I had been working with the school systems inside the system, which is frustrating, very frustrating, to get financial education into the school system for about 5 years. And it was the day that I met Robert and I saw that game that I knew Cash Flow, the board game, the Rich Dad information can change your life, but most importantly, it can change the future for our children.
So some of the other titles in education, I've been teaching since 1980 professionally. It's over 25 years. But you don't teach pigs to sing. Why A students don't become rich. You know, Sharon didn't like that chapter that much. But anyway.
It was really tough.
The other one is why you cannot teach poor people to be rich. And that so many people want to save the poor, but you know, if they don't want to learn, you can't teach them anything. So that's unfortunate. And the last one is how to increase your financial intelligence. And the last one beyond that is finding your financial genius. So that's what this book is about. It's not traditional education, I want to promise you that. It's about making learning fun and exciting and beneficial to real life. So Sharon has her pet project is, when you look at the cash flow board game over here, one thing talks about charity, the need to give back. And the Rich Dad company practices what it preaches. You want to talk about Rich Kid, Smart Kid?
Absolutely. In everything we do, in everything that Robert teaches, Rich Dad message is, the more you give, the more you receive. So from the beginning of time when we started this company, all of our products discuss the importance of charity. And as a company, we have developed a website called richkidsmartkid.com. And it came from, if I can take a moment and tell the story, we came out with a Cash Flow for Children, Cash Flow for Kids board game about 5 years ago. We live here in Arizona. We went to the superintendent of education and said, we would like to donate Cash Flow for Kid board games for every elementary school in the state of Arizona.
This is the board game, and this is the electronic version of it. You can play over the web.
And we were in the office of the superintendent of education for the state of Arizona, Robert and I, just like this, and she said to us, it's too much trouble. Both of us went, but you know, all things happen for a reason. It made me so mad. It made me so mad. I said, okay, how can we get around the institution of education? It's not the teachers, it's the institution.
Yeah, and as my father being a teacher, the reason they cannot teach this stuff is very simply because the government dictates what is taught to the kids. The teachers have no power over that. So that's when Sharon and I walked out, and I kind of smiled and said, see why I don't like school? You know, she goes, yeah. But a big reason then was, we're not blaming the teachers, it is the system. Does that make sense, you guys here? And the teachers have no power over what's to be taught. The government dictates that. Okay.
So we took that no and the anger that we had and said, how can we still accomplish what we want to accomplish? We created richkidsmartkid.com, which is a website with financial education, totally with curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade. It is available to schools around the world and to you as parents around the world. And it is for free. There is no charge. through that website, if you are a school, you can also get a downloadable version of the Cash Flow for Kids board game for free. Again, anywhere in the world. So 15 months after we got a no, through another direction, the electronic website, Rich Kid, Smart Kid, was available to every student in Arizona around the system through their desktops. So we turned it, and then we're able to leverage that and offer it to the world. And I'm very happy to say we've had over 2 million students play Rich Kid, Smart Kid.
Yeah. So that's the piece on education. Like I said, I would not have written a book, Teach to Be Rich, if it was going to be boring like school. Let's make it fun and exciting and all this. So when we come back, we'll go into how to be an active investor and take control of your investments. So thank you very much, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Investor, educator, and author Robert Kiyosaki has changed millions of lives all over the world. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 years. We all know that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and Social Security and Medicare are in a financial mess. And just affording to live is getting expensive. So how does a person get ahead financially? The answer is raising your financial IQ and having your money work for you. Here's Robert Kiyosaki with Rich Dad's Teach to Be Rich.
Welcome back, and as you know, we have a couple more props up on stage here. But going into it quickly, is in 1974, as I said, the world changed. In 1974, employees had to become investors through the 401k and mutual funds and all that. And unfortunately, our school systems don't teach us much about finances or how to invest. And because they don't teach us much about it, most people think investing is risky. And what they fail to understand that investing isn't risky, being uneducated is risky. Well, my rich dad said, there's no such thing as a bad investment, there's only bad investors. Or there's no such thing as a risky investment, there's only risky investors. And the reason I say that, as a professional investor, you can ask Kenny, we're always looking for bad investments, we're not looking for good ones. Because a bad investment's where you make your money. Because that's what we do, it reduces your risk. So really what risk is this. Is no control. And so if you look at the qualifications I ran up earlier in the program between a passive investor and an active investor, passive investors have no control. That's why they think investing is risky. And the riskiest of all investments are, again, savings, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, because you have no control over them. So to understand this better, we're going to use the example of learning how to drive a car. How many people realize that there is some risk in driving a car? But how many people still drive a car every day? Right. So the reason driving a car, while there's risk, doesn't have to be risky, is when you walk up to a car, the first thing you look at, does it have a steering wheel? Does it have a gas pedal? Does it have a brake? Does it have a gear shift? How many people would not drive the car if it had no steering wheel? How many people would say, driving a car without a steering wheel doesn't make any sense to me? Okay? So that's one of the reasons people think investing is risky, is they don't have these controls. So the way you look at it is, here I come up to the car, I look it over, I climb in, if we can get into this thing. Ugh. So I'm driving down the road, in control. I have a gas pedal, boom, 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 and a brake. And the brake, go forward, stop. How many people have ever driven a car without brakes? How many people found it an exciting experience? I have. Woo, like this. And you have a gear shift over here because it's go forward or you go back. And all of these things give you control. So those are the 4 basic controls, and there's 2 more controls you've got to have. One of them is you got to have a driver's license, which proves you took driver's ed, you passed the test. And the last control is proof of insurance. So if, let's say you're driving down the road, having a good time and all this, and all of a sudden you hear, bring, ding, 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 ding. The policeman comes up to the car, and being a good policeman, what's the first thing they ask you for? Driver's license and proof of insurance. So those are the 6 basic controls you got to have. Now, what happens to most people, because they don't have education, or in their investments, they're driving down the road, in mutual funds, and there's no brakes, there's no. Because people in savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds have absolutely no control. And that's why they think investing is risky. So you're driving down the road like this, going, whoa, whoa. And the worst thing about it is this, is your financial advisor. Do they have any control? No. You see, your financial advisor or the big company they work for, let's say it's XYZ Investment Banking Company, they have no control either. So they're telling you to diversify, to invest for the long term and all this, because they're driving down the road like this. And what it really looks like is this. Your financial advisor says, oh, I tell you what, I can't see the marketplace, but I tell you, stocks should go up, and the third quarter should be a little bit better. And this is what most financial advisors are telling you. Why? Because they have no control. And the reason they tell you to diversify is to protect them, because they have no control, and neither do you. Does that make sense, you guys here? And so as a professional investor, as a active investor, the number one thing is control. Got it? So let me see if I can get out of this wreck now. Jesus. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah. I broke the car. So, when you have no control, what a professional investor is looking for, there's 6 things. 6 things in driving a car, 6 things as an investor. First is income. I want to control income. Second is expenses. 3, asset value. 4, liability. 5, financial education or the management. Do you realize, and 6 is insurance. Do you realize most people cannot call the mutual fund manager and say, I don't like what you're doing? Do you realize most people cannot call Bill Gates, the CEO of Microsoft, and say, I don't like the way you're managing their expenses of a company? What's this new jet? Why'd you hire that worthless CEO? Why don't you hire somebody else? And the reason, so what a professional investor is looking for is control of these things. Number 1, income. 2, expenses. 3, asset value. 4, liability or debt. And you surround this whole thing is you want good financial education, or you want management, and you want insurance here. Those are the 6 basic controls as an investor. Let me give you an example. Let's say I buy a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house, and I want to increase its income. One thing I can do is I might be able to borrow a little bit of money, add a 3rd bedroom and a 2nd bath or a 3rd bath onto it, and what that does is increase my cash flow. That's an example of improving or taking control of this thing. If I call Bill Gates, like I said, and I say, Bill, I don't like that new jet you bought, what's he going to say to me? So what? Or I call my financial mutual fund guy, the man, like a Peter Lynch or something like this. They're not going to take my phone call. They don't have to tell me any controls here. So these are the 6 controls an investor must have. And that's what makes the very, very low risk. One last point I'll bring up, and then I'll bring Kenny and Garrett up here about insurance and all this, is that let's say this is 10 acres of land. What the value of a property is when I look at this here depends upon who I am professionally. Let's say I'm a farmer. That's my profession. I look at that 10 acres of land, and what I'll say is that thing is only worth $10,000 an acre to me. But if I look at it the way Kenny looks at it as a real estate developer, that same 10 acres may be worth $1 million to me. And that's what I mean by control, is that by looking at it from different points of view, that's how I make my money. So that's the same way when I saw those 10 acres in Bisbee, Arizona, they wanted $100,000 for it. And I said, what's the thing worth? It's not worth much as land, but it's worth $1.5 million as a manufactured housing type of thing. So this is how I have control. And that's, as an active investor, is what I'm going for. If I don't have controls of these things, I don't invest. So with that, Kenny, you want to come up here and then talk about, as a professional investor, what you look for and what controls you want. It's a big hand for Kenny here. Thank you.
Well, I think Robert touched on it a little bit. The first thing that we look for are problems, to be quite honest. We look for people who are poor managers or people who aren't seeing opportunities that we might see just through our day-to-day financial education. And I'll just give you a couple examples of that. Robert and Kim and I bought a building in the Biltmore area here in Phoenix just 1 year ago. And it was a small property with 68 units. And it's not far from Highland in the 24th area, in the Esplanade area there.
It's close to where Donald Trump is building his new building. Okay? So
right, and it had all the things that we wanted. It had really poor management, really bad income, and really high expenses. But it was very well located, and it was a very nice property. What had happened was the owner was absentee. In other words, he was treating the property like an investment instead of a business, because really real estate is a business. And if you don't have the proper team around it, it will go down in value. So this investor lived in Mexico and hadn't been to the property in a long time and had been through many different management companies, and the property had had a very poor history of occupancy. So what we were looking for was the opportunity piece. In other words, it had really low income and really high expenses, and the reason it had low income was because the management had not followed the systems. They had put poor tenants in, people that weren't paying rent, etc. And the reason it had high expenses was because of the low occupancy, they were having to spend money on the advertising and things like that happen when your occupancy's low. So what we did is we just put a better plan on it. That's all. So when we bought the property, Robert and I, we both immediately knew we wanted it because the property had been running at 68% occupancy, and the expenses were high. So what we did is we put the property into escrow, and we had the whole plan on the property before we were going to buy it. So I knew exactly what our plan was to turn the property into a profitable real estate venture before we closed it. And I knew everything about it through the process of which is called due diligence, which to me is one of the most important things that you can do before you buy any piece of property.
And this is Kenny's product that he did with me, and I think if you're going to be a professional investor, I think this is essential for your library. It's called How to Increase Your Investment from Your Real Estate Investments. And inside of it, I think this is what makes it priceless. It's what Kenny calls his due diligence checklist. Because Kenny and Kim and I are not flippers. We're not trying to buy something to flip it. These are all the checklists. When you inspect a property, you go through it. Say, this is what it needs, this is what it needs, does it have it, doesn't have it. And where most people become afraid, this is worth tens of thousands, maybe millions of dollars, because it is really the inspection of the building that either makes it profitable or not profitable. And this is really what you need in the whole thing. So Kenny's been very generous to giving all the actual forms he uses, checklists he goes through. Because most people are trying to buy, exactly as Buffett says, they're trying to buy because the prices are going up. That's gambling. That's capital gains. What we're looking for is solid value, the way Buffett looks at it. And it can only be done through a due diligence checklist. And they're not here right now, but there's also 4 audio cassettes that you can listen to and actually walk you through how this is used here. So this is essential for anybody who wants to invest in real estate, how to analyze a property. The interesting thing that Kenny says, when most people look at these, go through the diligence checklist, and they see horrible problems, they back off. But the reason we make so much money is because there are problems, right?
Well, we buy properties with 20, 30, 40% vacancy. That's where I look to buy. If I don't want to buy a property that is really highly occupied and has their rents at market, because to me there's very small opportunity for value growth, which is what we look for.
Right. So this is a very important product, and if you're interested, buy it. If you're not interested, don't buy it. But this is what really makes you rich. That's why it's such an important product. And the thing about this is the gentleman asked me during the break, and is how do you find great investments in this hot market? Well, this is the hottest market of all. Like I said, you can walk to Trump's new building from the building we bought. It was sitting there. Nobody wanted it because it had low income, high expenses, and all this. And the first thing that Kenny did was renegotiate the mortgage, got the lower interest rate on it. And all these things, that's where you make your money. You're not buying it to flip a property. That's gambling.
As a matter of fact, we received an offer unsolicited. We didn't list the property. We bought the property for $4.6 million. We received an offer 1 year later for $7 million, and we turned it down because we're not in the business of flipping property. We're in the business of long-term hold and cash flow. So we still own the property today.
Right. And like I said, Trump is building right down the street, and this is the hottest market of all. So this is how you find great investments: is you have to do your due diligence on a project. Right.
Well, the due diligence basically builds the plan for the whole property and building your wealth.
Big hand for Kenny. Thank you very much. All right, Garrett's coming up here. What Kenny is talking about here is management, which takes a little financial education. So Garrett's going to come up and talk a little bit about insurance, and insurance via the corporate asset protection.
Well, let me take a little informal poll right here. How many people have been sued? Let's be honest. How many people in the room have been sued? All right. How many people haven't been sued yet? All right. How many people think we live in a litigious society? And how many people would say there are a few attorneys out there without enough to do? Right? It's true. We live in a highly litigious society, and you need to take steps to protect your assets. And there are 2 forms for accomplishing that. One is insurance. When you buy an asset, like Robert says, he doesn't buy an asset unless he's got insurance on it. When you buy a piece of real estate, you're going to insure it. But what's the problem with insurance these days? Do insurance companies find reasons not to cover you? Yes. Do they get up and leave the state like they do every 5 years in California? Yes. So you need to take other steps to protect your real estate and your other assets. You need another form of insurance, which are entities. And that's what I wrote about in Own Your Own Corporation, is how to use these entities, the good entities, S corporations, C corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships to protect your assets.
What Garrett's saying, if you're going to be rich, there's no sense not insuring it. Does that make sense, you guys here? Well, a lot of people want to get rich, but they want to save a few bucks and not hire a person like Garrett to protect their assets from lawsuits. And I've seen that happen a lot of times. And the one thing they say about insurance, you cannot buy insurance when you need it. Like this car wreck over here. After I crash my car, I can't call my insurance agent and say, would you insure my car? You must buy insurance prior to the wreck. That's the rule of thumb here, okay?
Yeah, you can't form a corporation or an LLC to protect your real estate once you've been sued. It's too late at that point. So you need to take steps right at the start. When you're looking for that first piece of property, you need to take steps to protect it using the right entity.
So can I say something about that? As my poor dad always said, he was really proud of it. And this is a poor man's thinking. My house is in my name. My car is in my name. How many people have things in your name? Okay, that's poor person's thinking. You want nothing in your name if you're planning on being rich. If you're planning on being poor, keep it in your name because nobody's going to bother you.
Well, and the attorneys can take it from you.
Right.
So, sure, leave it exposed. But if you plan to be rich, if you plan to pass these assets on to your kids or your charities, you need to set up the right entities at the start.
That's with own corporations. So what are the worst, because what are the worst corporations or worst entities?
Well, the worst entity, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad entity is a sole proprietorship. Offers no asset protection at all. If you operate a business as a sole proprietor.
And do a lot of accountants recommend people be sole proprietors?
Yeah, they do. I don't know why.
Well,
they don't understand the nature of our legal system, whereby if you operate as a sole proprietor, you're completely exposed.
And the reason accountants do that is because a lot of them aren't rich, and they're not planning on being rich either. They're basically workers.
Well, a lot of accountants, with all due respect to Sharon Lechter, a lot of accountants will ask, how much money are you making in your business? And if you're only making $10,000 or $20,000, they'll say you don't need to incorporate. But that's the wrong question to ask. They need to ask, how much do you have to protect? You have a house, you have a bank account, you have other assets. You want to protect those assets from business claims that can come your way. If you operate as a sole proprietorship, all those assets are exposed.
Okay. So the worst is a sole proprietorship. What's the second worst?
Well, the worst is a general partnership, because that's liability times 2. Not only in a general partnership are you responsible for your own mistakes, but you're responsible for your partner's mistakes. You may not have agreed to a contract. You may have been 1,000 miles away when that contract was signed. And yet, as a general partner, you are equally responsible for everything that happens in that general partnership business.
Good. So how much does it cost me to employ you to write me well, first of all, why do you recommend Nevada and Wyoming?
Well, Nevada and Wyoming have very favorable asset protection laws. The LLC laws in both states provide great asset protection for individuals. And it's explained in the book, but basically it's the charging order procedure that gives you a great deal of protection. As well, in Nevada and Wyoming, there's no state tax. They offer a great deal of privacy, and there's no information sharing with the IRS, which can be of benefit to some people.
Right. There's no information sharing. You want to look me up, they won't tell you who owns the corporation.
Right.
Which is good. And then most people recommend Delaware. Why don't you recommend Delaware?
Well, Delaware has some extra fees. You have to do some additional reporting, whereas Nevada and Wyoming, it's much more streamlined. There's less requirements with one of those types of corporations, Nevada and Delaware. Delaware is great for the Fortune 500 company that wants a body of corporate law, a well-established court system. But for the majority of people who are protecting their assets, they're going to use Nevada or Wyoming.
And so how much does it cost to hire a great attorney like you to set up let's say an LLC for me?
Well, Robert, that's one of the things that's interesting. This is not expensive. It is only $695 plus the state filing fees to set up a corporation anywhere in the U.S. So it's not expensive. If you go to an attorney and they say it's going to be $2,000 to $5,000 to set up an entity, shop elsewhere, because it's not expensive. You can do this and consider it like insurance. It's just a payment you'll make, a low annual payment to make to protect your assets.
And the other question is this, is that you have to update it every year, or you have to have a meeting every year. How much does that cost to do that?
Well, we charge a flat fee of $150 to prepare the minutes. You can do it yourself. The problem is a lot of people don't. So for $150 a year, your corporate books are kept in shape, and you're not going to have a problem with someone trying to pierce the corporate veil and go after your personal assets.
So after this, let's say $700, it costs you $150 after that. That's really, really good insurance, because as Garrett says, you can't buy insurance after you're sued. And they can come and take everything you want after that. So my wife and I have multiple S and LLCs and Cs.
You've done a good job.
Yeah, they can hit one, they can't take it all, which is what we want. And without mentioning names, is the last thing, is there's somebody peddling something that you think is really wacko?
Well, there's a fellow out there that's peddling limited partnerships as the be-all, end-all, and he gives 100% guarantee of asset protection. And in all good conscience, you cannot make 100% guarantee on this. Yes, you can protect yourself. Yes, you can be better off using a corporation or an LLC than by going it alone. But no one can give 100% asset protection guarantee.
So, anyway, let's have a big hand for Garrett. I think
Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, for this thing, I know it may sound like a lot, taking control. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to fix toilets, I don't want to do this. So you don't ever take control. On our investments, Kim and I do not fix toilets, because these hands were not made for work, you know what I mean? So anyway, with that, so I want to bring up Kim, and she wants to speak to the women and how to start. And this is all part of how you get started. And this is my sweetheart, Kim. Let's have a big hand for her, please. And I know she didn't marry me for my money because over 20 years ago when we met, I was flat broke because I lost another company and all this. And she was one of the few women with the beauty and the brains, but she had backbone to put up with all we went through to build our fortunes again. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Robert. Robert and I just celebrated our 19th wedding anniversary. We've been together 22 years, and
I did good, huh? I did good.
we both did good. We both did good. But I've got to say, it definitely has not been boring. And actually, Robert talked about how much debt he was in. I didn't understand good debt or bad debt at that time, but we actually celebrated when we hit zero. We popped the champagne on that one. But Robert's talking a lot about control, and my concern is that there's so many women out there today that feel out of control when it comes to money and when it comes to their financial futures. And I am a huge proponent of women getting involved in the world of investing. And more importantly, my passion is really to encourage and educate women to take control of their financial lives and ultimately to become financially independent. Because there's a lot of women I see every day who are depending on somebody else, be it a man, be it a family, a company, or a government, to take care of them financially. And times have changed.
Why don't you tell them the story of your mom and all that, and why you're so adamant about it?
Yeah, well, what drives me, what Robert's talking about, is there was an incident that happened when I was very young. And I was 14 years old, and I came home from school one day, and I walked in, and my mom and her best friend were in the dining room. And I kind of heard them talking, and I walked over there, and I could see that my mom's friend was really upset, and she was crying, and my mom kind of, signaled me to, just leave us alone. And so I went away, but I didn't go too far, and was listening to this conversation. And the gist of the conversation is my mom's best friend's, her husband was leaving her for a younger woman. And she was distraught, she was crying, she was upset. She's like, I can't believe this is happening. And I kept listening, and then I heard her say something that just really struck me. And my mom had asked, did you realize what was happening? And she said, my marriage has not been good for many, many years, but I stayed because at least I was taken care of financially. She said, I was too concerned that if I left, I didn't know how to take care of myself. And I was 14 years old, and I heard that, and I went, wow. I'm like, here's this woman, she's in a terrible marriage, she's miserable, yet the only reason she stays is because financially she doesn't know how to take care of herself. So at 14, I made the decision I was never going to be dependent on somebody else for my financial future. And that's why I speak out to women, because I think women today, it's no longer a luxury or just a good idea. I think it's really a necessity that we start to take control of our financial lives. Would you agree?
Right.
Thank you.
So if I could say, because we had Kim follow Garrett, is Kim has her own corporations. We don't have a prenuptial agreement and all that, because if I horse around and it's gone, she doesn't have to worry. There's no fighting. She owns her own corporations, her own assets, her own bank account. She's gone. It's split already. And the reason we do that is just to cut this dependency stuff out. Right? Would you say that's true?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So she's, in many ways, Garrett knows she's a lot smarter than I am today on this stuff anyway, because she wants to make sure that she's independent. So she has her own corporations. I have my own corporations, my own investments, and things like that.
Well, you wouldn't want me dependent on you.
No, I don't.
That wouldn't work either. What's happened is as we become more and more independent, our relationship changes, because for me personally, my self-respect goes up, my confidence goes up, and all of a sudden we don't need each other anymore. It's like we want to be together, but that dependency isn't there anymore, and that's made a huge difference. So times have changed, and what's worked for our mothers and our grandmothers may not work for us and our daughters and our granddaughters. And there's some startling statistics I want to share with you. This is in the US, but I see the same pattern happening throughout the world, which is, one of the statistics is 47% of women over the age of 50 are single, meaning they are dependent for their financial well-being. And many of us have heard the statistic, 1 out of 2 marriages ends in divorce. So if she was counting on Prince Charming, think again, and who usually ends up with the children? the woman. So she's now responsible for herself and her kids. The first year on average after a divorce, a woman's standard of living drops 74%. His does not. And if you're concerned about your mothers or your grandmothers, of the elderly, there's statistics all over the place, but of the elderly living in poverty, 3 out of 4 are women. And the most interesting thing is 80% of those women were not poor when their husbands were alive. So what the statistics tell me is that as women, especially as we become older, we have not been educated, we have not been prepared to take care of ourselves financially, and now more than ever it's more important to do so. And it's not rocket science, as Robert's sharing with you and the advisors will share with you. It's not rocket science. It takes some time, it takes some education. We always say start small, expect to make mistakes, and take little steps, take baby steps to get there. And I'm actually a very good example of somebody that knew absolutely nothing when it came to money and investing. And it was in 1989, Robert came to me and he said, "Kim, it's time you start investing." And I didn't even know what the word meant. You know, I've seen the Wall Street Journal, that's about it. So he started to teach me what his rich dad taught him. And then I was kind of sent out on the street to go figure it out. And to make a long story short, my very first investment was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in Portland, Oregon. It was $45,000. I was going to have to put $5,000 down, and it was going to give me a cash flow of $50 a month. And I was so proud of it. But I'll tell you, when Kenny talks about due diligence, I was so scared. I was terrified. What if I make a mistake? What if the tenant moves out? What if? I did due diligence 10 times more than I needed to do. I was so scared. I didn't trust myself. I didn't know what I was doing. But finally the day came to close on the property. And we're in the office of the real estate agent, and 2 things happened. One, they needed my signature, and it was really hard to get because my hand was shaking so bad. And the other problem was they couldn't pry that $5,000 check out of my hand. But I did that deal, and I went on to do more and more, and with every deal I did, I learned something new. And there's nothing more valuable than the actual experience that you get, and nobody can tell you about it until you actually get out there and do it. So today I control millions and millions of dollars worth of real estate. I keep learning every day. I keep getting more and more educated. And it all started with a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. It started with a little education, and it started with that first step. And just a little inside story. When
Go ahead and tell.
I can tell it? Okay. When Robert talked about that deal that I did where we borrowed the $8 million, he wasn't real involved in it at the time. And this time, instead of walking into a real estate agent's office, we walked into the attorney's boardroom. There were like 15 banker's boxes full of documents and paperwork. And we had everything was lined up to sign, and he looks at me and he goes, "What did you borrow? How much did you borrow? What are you doing? What is this?"
And when she said, $8 million, I said, 8? You borrowing $8 million? And so we came to deciding she was calm as a cucumber, and then they passed the thing to me. I was like, $8 million? What has my wife bought here? So the rules have changed anyway.
The rules have changed. And I want to say, if I can do it, I mean, I started from nothing. If I can do it, you can do it. It's not rocket science.
It's just more zeros. That's about the only difference.
Well, it's, as Kenny said, it's the same, whether it's Hong Kong or Phoenix or wherever, it's the same formula, just more zeros.
So if we can encourage you, the reason we show this wreckage of this car here, most people think investing is risky. What is really risky is not being in control and taking bad financial advice. Does that make sense to you guys here? So thank you very much. And
just one last thing I'd like to say to women, one final statistic, because I think it's very important.
They always get the last word, you know what I'm saying?
Which is that the statistics studies come out and said that only 20% of baby boomer women will be financially secure in retirement. That means 80% of us will not be. So I really want to thank you for being here, and thank you for listening and watching this program, because again, it's just education, and by taking those steps, you're saying, I'm going to be part of that 20% and not part of that 80%. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem. Okay, when we come back, we'll go into how to listen to good advisors, because as I said, I didn't do well in school, but I always surround myself with very smart A-student advisors. And I'll have my advisors, they'll be talking about what they do and how you find good advisors for yourself. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you very much.